The crystal towers of the Zephyrian Palace rose into the purple sky like giant fingers reaching for the stars. Inside those gleaming walls, Katie Morrison pushed her cleaning cart down the long, empty hallway. Her footsteps echoed softly on the polished stone floor. The night shift was always quiet, which Katie preferred. During the day, the palace buzzed with alien voices and the heavy footsteps of the reptilian Zephyrians who ruled this world. Katie was human, one of thousands brought to serve in the palace after Earth fell to the Empire 50 years ago. She had been only 3 years old when the great ships came down from the sky. Now at 23, she knew no other life than this one. The Zephyrians were not cruel masters, but they were distant. To them, humans were useful creatures, good at cleaning and simple tasks, but nothing more. The palace was enormous, with hundreds of rooms and corridors that seemed to go on forever. Katie had been working here for 2 years, ever since she turned 21 and was deemed old enough for palace service. She cleaned the lower floors, far from where the important Zephyrians lived and worked. Most nights she saw no one except other servants, both human and alien. Tonight felt different, though. As Katie worked, she kept hearing something strange. It started as a low sound, barely noticeable above the hum of the air systems. But as the night grew deeper, the sound became clearer. It was like crying, but deeper and more powerful than any human could make. The sound seemed to come from somewhere high above, echoing down through the crystal walls of the palace. Katie stopped cleaning and listened. The sound was definitely crying, but it was unlike anything she had ever heard. It was deep and mournful, filled with such sadness that it made her chest feel tight. The crying went on, rising and falling like ocean waves. She had heard rumors about strange sounds in the palace at night. The other servants whispered about it during their brief meal breaks. They called it the Dragon's Lament, though none of them had ever seen the creature that made it. The older servants said it had been going on for decades, every single night without fail. Ben Parker, an elderly human who had worked in the palace since the conquest, had told Katie about it during her first week. "The Emperor has a dragon," he had said in a low voice, looking around to make sure no Zephyrians were nearby. "They're bonded mind to mind." But something happened long ago, and now the dragon weeps every night. The Emperor too, some say. Katie had thought it was just gossip, the kind of stories that servants told to make their lives seem more interesting. But now, hearing the sound herself, she knew it was real. Something up in the highest levels of the palace was crying, and the sadness in that voice was breaking her heart. The sound grew louder as the night went on. Katie tried to focus on her work, scrubbing floors and emptying waste containers, but she could not stop listening. The crying seemed to fill the entire palace, seeping through the walls and into her bones. It was the sound of complete despair, as if whatever made it had given up all hope. Around midnight, Katie was cleaning near the east wing when she noticed something she had never seen before. There was a small doorway hidden behind a decorative screen, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. The crying sound was much stronger here, as if it was coming from just above her head. Katie knew she should not investigate. Keeper Silneth, the head steward who managed all the palace servants, had made it very clear during her first day that humans were never to go into the upper levels. "Your duties are in the lower palace only," the tall Zephyrian had said, his yellow eyes cold and unblinking. "The Emperor's private areas are forbidden. Any human found there will face severe punishment." But the crying was so sad, so full of pain, that Katie could not just ignore it. She had always been curious, even as a child in the human quarters outside the city. Her mother had often scolded her for asking too many questions and wandering where she should not go. That curiosity had only grown stronger as she got older. Katie looked around to make sure she was alone, then pushed aside the screen. Behind it was a narrow staircase that spiraled upward into darkness. The crying was definitely coming from somewhere at the top of those stairs. She knew she should turn around and forget what she had found, but something inside her would not let her leave. She climbed the stairs slowly, her heart beating fast. The stone steps were old and worn smooth by countless years. Strange symbols were carved into the walls, glowing faintly with their own light. The crying grew louder with each step she took. At the top of the stairs, Katie found herself in a small chamber with walls made entirely of clear crystal. Through the crystal, she could see into a vast room beyond. What she saw there made her gasp and cover her mouth with her hands. The room was enormous, big enough to hold 100 humans. The walls were covered with beautiful paintings and strange artifacts that glowed with soft light. But Katie barely noticed any of that, because her attention was completely focused on the two figures in the center of the room. One was clearly a dragon, but unlike anything Katie had ever imagined. It was huge, the size of a small building with scales that shimmered like black stars. Its wings were folded along its body and its great head rested on the floor. Tears, actual tears as large as Katie's fist, fell from its enormous eyes and pooled on the stone floor around it. Beside the dragon sat a figure in royal robes. Katie could not see his face clearly, but she knew it had to be Emperor Vexthon himself. He was much smaller than the dragon, but Katie could see that he was crying too. His shoulders shook with silent sobs as he reached out to touch the dragon's massive head. The sight was so heartbreaking that Katie felt her own eyes fill with tears. Here were two of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, and they were crying together like lost children. The Emperor, who commanded fleets of starships and ruled over billions of people, looked completely helpless as he tried to comfort his dragon companion. Katie watched for nearly an hour as the dragon wept, and the Emperor sat beside it in shared misery. She had never seen anything so sad in her entire life. Whatever had happened to cause this pain must have been terrible beyond imagination. Finally, Katie forced herself to leave. She crept back down the stairs and returned to her cleaning duties, but she could not concentrate on anything except what she had seen. The image of the weeping dragon and the heartbroken Emperor was burned into her memory. For the rest of the night, Katie worked mechanically, her mind spinning with questions. What could make a dragon cry like that? What tragedy had befallen the Emperor to leave him so destroyed? And why did this happen every single night? As dawn approached and her shift ended, Katie knew that her life had changed. She could not simply pretend she had not seen what she had seen. Somehow she had to find out what was wrong, and if there was anything she could do to help, even though she was just a human servant, even though it was dangerous and forbidden. Katie Morrison decided that she would find a way to ease the pain of the weeping dragon and its heartbroken Emperor. Katie could not sleep during the day. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the massive dragon weeping and the Emperor sitting beside it in helpless sadness. The image would not leave her mind. She tossed and turned in her small bed in the servants' quarters, but rest would not come. When evening arrived and it was time for her next shift, Katie was exhausted but determined. She had spent the entire day thinking about what she had witnessed, and she knew she had to learn more. The crying had been so full of pain that it made her chest ache just remembering it. Katie arrived early for work and went straight to the lower levels of the palace where the old data terminals were kept. These machines were ancient by palace standards, used mainly by servants to check work schedules and maintenance reports. Most of the other servants ignored them, but Katie had always been good with technology. She sat down at one of the terminals and began searching through the palace records. Most of the information was about daily operations, staff assignments, and supply inventories. But buried deep in the older files, Katie found references to something called void dragons and their connection to Zephyrian royalty. The files were written in formal Zephyrian language, which was difficult for Katie to read, but she managed to understand the basic facts. Void dragons were among the oldest and most intelligent species in the galaxy. They lived for thousands of years and had powerful mental abilities. Most importantly, they could form psychic bonds with other beings, sharing thoughts and emotions directly. Katie learned that the bond between a dragon and its chosen companion was sacred to the Zephyrians. The two minds became connected in a way that was deeper than marriage or family. They shared each other's feelings, memories, and even physical sensations. When one suffered, the other suffered too. When one died, the other often died shortly after from grief. The records showed that Emperor Vexthon had bonded with his dragon, Nixara, when they were both very young. For over 200 years, they had been inseparable. The dragon had fought beside the Emperor in countless battles, helping to build the great empire that now spanned 3 galaxies. But something had changed 50 years ago, right around the time Earth was conquered. The records from that period were heavily restricted, with most of the details marked as classified. Katie could only find scattered references to a tragic incident and the loss of the imperial daughter. Katie's heart began to race as she pieced together fragments of information. The Emperor had had a daughter, Princess Lyraneth, who had been killed during the conquest of human worlds. The exact details were hidden in the classified files, but it was clear that her death had devastated both the Emperor and his dragon. Jake Collins, a human maintenance worker, found Katie hunched over the terminal late into the night. Jake was older than Katie, maybe 30, with kind eyes and calloused hands from years of repair work. He was one of the few people in the palace Katie considered a friend. "You've been here for hours," Jake said, sitting down beside her. "What are you researching so intensely?" Katie looked around to make sure they were alone, then told Jake about what she had seen the night before. She described the hidden staircase, the crystal chamber, and the heartbreaking scene of the dragon and Emperor weeping together. Jake's face grew serious as he listened. "Katie, you could be executed for going into the Emperor's private areas. The Zephyrians don't joke about security." "I know," Katie said, "but Jake, you should have seen them. The pain in that room was so thick you could almost touch it. That dragon was crying like its heart was broken, and the Emperor looked like he wanted to die." Jake was quiet for a long moment, then leaned closer to the terminal. "Let me help you search. I have access to maintenance records that might have information you can't find in the general files." Together, they spent hours going through old reports and work orders. Jake's maintenance files contained more details about the palace layout and the special facilities built for the dragon. They learned that Nixara had her own massive chamber in the highest tower, specially designed to accommodate her enormous size. More importantly, they found references to construction work done 50 years ago. New soundproofing had been installed around the dragon's chamber, along with what the reports called emotional dampening fields. The Zephyrians had tried to contain the dragon's grief, preventing it from affecting the rest of the palace. "Look at this," Jake said, pointing to an old work order. "They've tried everything. Special healers, meditation chambers, even bringing in priests from different religions. Nothing has worked." Katie read through the reports of failed attempts to help the Emperor and his dragon. Dozens of experts had tried to ease their pain over the years, but none had succeeded. The nightly weeping had continued without interruption for 5 decades. As the night wore on, Katie and Jake discovered more pieces of the puzzle. Princess Lyraneth had been commanding a fleet near Earth's moon when she died. The battle had been fierce, with human resistance fighters using desperate tactics to defend their home world. In the chaos, something had gone terribly wrong. "I think the dragon accidentally killed the princess," Katie whispered, her voice barely audible. "Look at these medical reports. They mention psychic feedback and mental blast trauma. The princess's ship was destroyed by the same type of energy that dragons use in battle." Jake's eyes widened as he understood what Katie was suggesting. "You mean Nixara was fighting the humans and somehow hit the princess's ship by mistake?" "That would explain everything," Katie said. "The dragon feels guilty for killing someone she loved, and the Emperor blames himself for bringing his daughter to war. They're both trapped by guilt and grief, and it's been eating them alive for 50 years. The more Katie thought about it, the more certain she became. The dragon's nightly weeping was not just sadness, it was guilt. She was trying to cry away the pain of having accidentally killed the Emperor's beloved daughter. And the Emperor, sharing the dragon's emotions through their psychic bond, was drowning in the same guilt and sorrow. This is why none of the healers could help them, Katie realized. The Zephyrians don't understand guilt the way humans do. They try to treat it like simple grief, but guilt is different. It eats at you from the inside. Jake looked worried. "Katie, even if you're right, what can you do about it? You're a human servant. The Emperor would never listen to you, and getting near that dragon could be suicide." But Katie was already making plans. She had grown up hearing stories from her grandmother about the old days on Earth, before the conquest. Her grandmother had been a counselor who helped people work through difficult emotions. She had taught Katie that sometimes the most important thing was simply to listen and show that you cared. "I have to try," Katie said. "I can't just ignore what I've seen. That dragon and the Emperor are suffering, and maybe there's something I can do to help." Jake shook his head. "It's too dangerous. Keeper Silnith is already suspicious of you. I've seen him watching you during the shift changes. If he finds out you've been researching the Emperor's private affairs, then I'll have to be more careful," Katie said. "But I won't give up. Not when I might be able to help them." Over the next few nights, Katie continued her research while carefully performing her normal cleaning duties. She learned more about dragon psychology and Zephyrian culture. She studied the layout of the palace and memorized the schedules of the security guards. Most importantly, she began to form a plan. It was dangerous and probably foolish, but Katie could not shake the image of the weeping dragon from her mind. Somewhere in the highest tower of the palace, two powerful beings were trapped in an endless cycle of pain and guilt. Katie Morrison, a simple human servant, decided she was going to try to set them free. Katie spent 3 days preparing for what she knew might be the most dangerous thing she had ever done. She gathered supplies carefully, taking small items that would not be missed from the palace stores. From the kitchen, she took dried lavender that the cooks used to flavor certain dishes. The purple flowers reminded her of home and the gardens her grandmother had kept on Earth. From the servants' quarters, she borrowed an old music player that belonged to Ben Parker. The device was ancient, containing songs from Earth that Ben had somehow kept hidden during the conquest. Katie chose the saddest and most beautiful songs, the ones that talked about loss and hope and healing. Most importantly, she spent hours writing a letter. Katie wrote it by hand on real paper, something that was rare and expensive in the palace. She wrote to Princess Lyraneth as if the dead woman could hear her words. The letter talked about forgiveness, about love that continues even after death, and about how the living must find ways to heal without forgetting those they have lost. Jake helped Katie study the palace's air system. The ventilation shafts were large enough for a person to crawl through, designed to carry air to even the highest towers. Jake had worked on these systems many times and knew exactly which passages led to the dragon's chamber. The shaft opens about 20 feet above the floor, Jake explained, showing Katie a hand-drawn map. There's a grate you can remove from the inside. But Katie, once you drop down into that room, there's no quick way out. If the dragon or the emperor decides you're a threat, I know the risks, Katie said quietly, but I have to try. Every night I hear that crying, and it breaks my heart a little more. I can't just do nothing. On the 4th night, Katie put her plan into action. She waited until the palace was deep in sleep, then made her way to the maintenance area where Jake had shown her the entrance to the ventilation system. Her heart was beating so hard she was sure everyone in the palace could hear it. The shaft was dark and cramped. Katie had to crawl on her hands and knees, pulling her small bag of supplies behind her. The metal was cold against her skin, and several times she had to stop and rest as her muscles cramped from the awkward position. As she got closer to the dragon's chamber, she could hear the weeping more clearly. The sound echoed through the metal shaft, deep and mournful. Katie felt tears in her own eyes as she listened to the raw pain in that voice. She had never heard anything so heartbreaking in her entire life. Finally, Katie reached the grate that looked down into the dragon's chamber. Through the metal slats, she could see the enormous room below. Nyxara was curled in the center of the space, her massive body shaking with sobs. Tears fell from her huge eyes like waterfalls pooling on the stone floor around her. Emperor Vexthan sat beside his dragon, one hand resting on her great head. He was crying too, his face twisted with pain that seemed to come from the very center of his soul. The psychic bond between them meant they shared each other's agony, doubling their suffering. Katie carefully removed the grate and lowered herself into the chamber. She dropped silently to the floor, her soft shoes making barely any sound on the stone. For a moment, neither the dragon nor the emperor noticed her. They were too lost in their shared grief. Then Nyxara raised her massive head and saw Katie standing there. The dragon's eyes, each one larger than Katie's entire body, focused on the small human figure. Katie expected to see anger or threat in those ancient eyes, but instead she saw something that surprised her. The dragon looked curious, almost hopeful. Emperor Vexthan spun around, his royal robe swirling. His face was streaked with tears, but his expression quickly changed to rage. "How dare you enter this sacred place?" he shouted in accented English. "Guards, seize this intruder." But no guards came. The chamber was too well soundproofed, and besides, Katie realized, the emperor probably did not want anyone else to witness his nightly breakdown. He stood up, towering over Katie's small form, his hands glowing with the same energy that had conquered worlds. "Wait," Katie said, her voice steady despite her terror. "Please just listen to me for a moment." "You have no right to be here, human," the emperor snarled. "This is a private matter between myself and my bonded companion. Your presence defiles this sacred space." But Nyxara made a sound, a deep rumble that was different from her crying. The dragon was looking at Katie with intelligent eyes, as if trying to understand why this small creature had appeared in their chamber of sorrow. Through their psychic bond, the dragon shared her curiosity with the emperor. Vexthon paused, his energy-wreathed hand still raised to strike Katie down. Nixara wishes to know why you have come here. Speak quickly, before I decide your life is forfeit. Katie took a deep breath and stepped closer to the massive dragon. I came because I hear you crying every night and it breaks my heart. I know what happened to Princess Lyraneth. I know about the accident during the battle. And I know you both blame yourselves for her death. The Emperor's eyes widened in shock. How could you possibly know about that? Those records are classified at the highest level. I researched everything I could find, Katie said honestly, because I needed to understand why you're both in so much pain. You see, I lost someone too. My brother died when your ships first came to Earth. But I learned something important about grief and guilt that I think might help you. Katie slowly reached into her bag and pulled out the music player. In my world, we have ways of dealing with loss that don't involve endless suffering. We believe that those we love would want us to heal and find happiness again, not torture ourselves forever. She activated the music player, and soft, sad melodies began to fill the chamber. The songs were in human languages that neither the Emperor nor the dragon understood, but music speaks to the heart in ways that go beyond words. The beautiful, mournful tunes seemed to wrap around their pain like a gentle embrace. Next, Katie took out the dried lavender and scattered it around Nixara's massive head. The sweet scent filled the air, a small reminder of life and growth and beauty. Smell is connected to memory in ways that can help healing, she explained. This flower represents hope and renewal. Finally, Katie pulled out her letter and began to read, but she did not address her words to the Emperor or the dragon. Instead, she spoke as if Princess Lyraneth herself was there in the room with them. Princess, Katie said, her voice clear and strong, your father and Nixara love you so much that they're destroying themselves with guilt over your death. But you know it wasn't their fault. Accidents happen in war, terrible accidents that no one wants or plans. The question isn't whether to feel sad about losing you. Of course they should feel sad. The question is whether their grief honors your memory or dishonors it. Katie looked up at the Emperor's shocked face and the dragon's huge, attentive eyes. If you could speak to them now, Princess, what would you say? Would you want them to spend eternity crying and hating themselves? Or would you want them to remember the love you shared and find ways to keep that love alive through kindness and wisdom and joy? She continued reading her letter, talking about forgiveness and healing and the difference between healthy grief and destructive guilt. She spoke about how love doesn't die when a person dies, but it can be transformed into something beautiful if people let it. As Katie read, something remarkable began to happen. Nixara's crying grew quieter. The dragon's great eyes remained fixed on Katie, as if seeing something she had never seen before. Even the Emperor seemed transfixed, his anger replaced by wonder. When Katie finished reading, the chamber was silent for the first time in 50 years. The dragon's tears had stopped flowing and the Emperor stood perfectly still, his mind processing what he had just heard. How? The Emperor whispered. How do you know these things? You are just a servant, a simple human. Katie smiled through her own tears. Maybe that's exactly what you needed. Someone simple. Someone who understands that healing doesn't require great power or ancient wisdom. Sometimes it just requires someone who cares enough to try. For the first time in half a century, the dragon Nixara was not weeping. Instead, she was listening, and in her ancient eyes, Katie could see the first tiny spark of something that might, someday, become hope. Word spread through the palace like wildfire. By morning, every servant knew that Katie Morrison had somehow entered the Emperor's private chamber and lived to tell about it. Some said she was blessed by ancient powers. Others whispered that she was a spy or a witch who had cast a spell on the royal family. The fear in their eyes made Katie's stomach turn. Keeper Sileneth was furious when he learned what had happened. The tall Zephyrian stormed through the servants' quarters, his yellow eyes blazing with anger. He found Katie in the dining hall eating her simple breakfast with shaking hands. You foolish creature, Sileneth hissed, his forked tongue flicking out as he spoke. Do you have any idea what you have done? Entering the Emperor's private sanctuary without permission is punishable by death. I should have you executed immediately. Katie looked up at the angry steward, trying to keep her voice steady. The Emperor told me to come back tonight. He wants to see me again. This was true. Before Katie had left the chamber the night before, Emperor Vexthon had stared at her for a long moment, then said quietly, Return tomorrow night, human. My dragon wishes to learn more about your healing methods. Silnith's eyes narrowed dangerously. The Emperor said this? You expect me to believe that our glorious ruler would request the company of a lowly human servant? Ask him yourself, Katie said, surprised by her own courage. But I don't think he would appreciate being disturbed during his day rest to verify something he already commanded. The keeper stood there for several minutes, clearly torn between his desire to punish Katie and his fear of angering the Emperor. Finally, he leaned down close to her face, his breath hot and smelling of sulfur. If you are lying, human, I will make sure your death is slow and painful. And if you are telling the truth, remember that one mistake, one wrong word, and I will be there to clean up what remains of you. Katie spent the day trying to understand what she had started. Other servants avoided her, afraid that talking to her might bring trouble. Only Jake and Ben Parker dared to approach her. What was it like? Ben asked, his old eyes wide with curiosity. Did you really see the Emperor's dragon up close? Katie described Nyxera's massive size and intelligence, the way the dragon had listened to every word she spoke. She told them about the Emperor's tears and how the chamber had felt heavy with decades of accumulated sadness. But something changed last night, Katie said. When I left, the dragon wasn't crying anymore. She was thinking, really thinking about what I had said, and the Emperor looked different too, less broken somehow. Jake shook his head in amazement. Do you realize what you've done? If you've actually helped them, you might have changed the course of history. But if you've made things worse, I know, Katie said quietly. But I had to try. I couldn't just listen to that crying every night and do nothing. That evening, Katie returned to the dragon's chamber through the same ventilation shaft. This time she brought different supplies. She had spent the day thinking about human healing methods and what might help beings who were connected by psychic bonds. When she dropped down into the chamber, she found the Emperor and Nyxera waiting for her. The dragon was still enormous and intimidating, but her posture was different. Instead of being curled up in despair, she was sitting upright, alert and interested. Emperor Vexthon looked different too. His eyes were clearer, and while he still seemed sad, the wild desperation was gone. He watched Katie carefully as she approached. You have returned as I requested, the Emperor said. Nyxera has been thinking about your words all day. Through our bond, I have felt her mind working in ways it has not worked for 50 years. Tell me, human, how do you know so much about healing emotional wounds? Katie sat down on the floor, making herself small and non-threatening. My grandmother taught me. Before the conquest, she helped people on Earth who were struggling with difficult feelings. She said that pain shared is pain reduced, but only if it's shared with someone who truly listens. Your grandmother was a healer, the Emperor asked, seeming surprised that a human could possess such knowledge. In a way, Katie said, she couldn't fix broken bones or cure diseases, but she could help people find ways to live with loss and trauma. She taught me that grief and guilt are different things, and they need to be treated differently. Katie began to explain human concepts of emotional healing. She talked about how grief was natural and healthy, a way of honoring those who had died. But guilt, she explained, was different. Guilt could become a prison that trapped people in the past, preventing them from living fully in the present. Princess Lyraneth died in an accident, Katie said gently. Nyxera's mind was focused on protecting the fleet and fighting the human ships. In the chaos of battle, a psychic blast meant for the enemy struck the princess instead. It was a terrible tragedy, but it was not murder or carelessness. It was the kind of accident that happens in war. The Emperor's hands clenched into fists. But I should have protected her. I should never have allowed her to command that fleet. And that's your guilt talking, Katie said. You're both carrying guilt that doesn't belong to you. The princess chose to serve in the military. She chose to lead that fleet. She knew the risks, just like every soldier knows the risks. Her death was tragic, but it wasn't your fault or Nyxera's fault. Katie spent hours with them, introducing human techniques for dealing with trauma and guilt. She taught them breathing exercises that help separate their individual emotions from their shared psychic bond. She showed them how to remember the princess with love instead of pain, focusing on happy memories rather than the moment of her death. In human culture, Katie explained, we believe that the best way to honor the dead is to live fully in their memory. Princess Lyraneth would want you to be strong and wise and happy. Your suffering doesn't bring her back, and it doesn't prove your love for her. What proves your love is how you carry her memory forward. As the nights passed, Katie continued her sessions with the Emperor and his dragon. She brought different things each time, photographs of Earth's flowers, recordings of children laughing, stories about how humans dealt with loss and trauma. Slowly, both the Emperor and Nixara began to change. The dragon's scales, which had been dull and lifeless, started to regain their natural luster. The Emperor stood straighter and his voice grew stronger. Most importantly, the nightly weeping sessions grew shorter and less intense. But Katie's unusual access to the royal family was creating problems elsewhere in the palace. Keeper Silnith watched her constantly, looking for any excuse to remove what he saw as a dangerous influence. Other palace officials began to whisper about the human servant, who had somehow gained the Emperor's attention. Some of the Zephyrian nobles were particularly disturbed by the changes they observed in their ruler. For decades, Emperor Vexthon had been distant and harsh, ruling through fear and military might. His grief had made him cruel, but it had also made him predictable. Now as he began to heal, he started making different kinds of decisions. The Emperor began showing mercy where once he would have ordered executions. He started asking questions about the welfare of his subjects instead of simply demanding obedience. These changes frightened some of the nobles, who preferred the broken but controllable ruler they had known. 3 weeks after Katie's first visit to the dragon's chamber, she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. She was cleaning near the council chambers when she heard voices speaking in formal Zephyrian. Her language skills were limited, but she understood enough to realize that several high-ranking nobles were planning something dangerous. They spoke about the Emperor's weakness and his contamination by human influence. They mentioned removing Katie permanently and finding ways to return the Emperor to his former state of grief and isolation. Most terrifyingly, they discussed the possibility of severing the psychic bond between the Emperor and his dragon. Believing this would make Vexthon easier to control, Katie realized with horror that her efforts to help had put everyone in danger. The healing she had begun might be destroyed by politics and fear. Worse, the Emperor and Nixara might suffer even more than before if their enemies succeeded in their plot. She had to warn them, but doing so would reveal how much she had learned about palace politics. It would prove that she was more than just a simple servant offering comfort to grieving rulers. Katie would have to risk everything to save the progress they had made. As she hurried through the dark corridors toward the dragon's chamber, Katie realized that the real test of her healing work was just beginning. Katie rushed through the palace corridors, her heart pounding with fear and urgency. She had to reach the Emperor before the nobles could put their plan into action. The things she had overheard were too dangerous to ignore, even if warning the Emperor might cost her everything. When she reached the dragon's chamber that night, Katie found Emperor Vexthon and Nixara in the middle of what had become their nightly healing session. The dragon was no longer weeping constantly, though tears still came when they spoke about Princess Lyraneth. Instead, they had been working through memories, learning to separate love from guilt as Katie had taught them. "Your Majesty," Katie said, breathing hard from her rushed journey, "I have to tell you something important. There are nobles planning to hurt you and Nixara. They want to stop the healing work we've been doing." The Emperor's expression grew serious. "What exactly did you hear, Katie?" Katie told him everything she had understood from the overheard conversation. She explained about the nobles' plan to remove her, and their terrifying idea of severing the psychic bond between the Emperor and his dragon. As she spoke, Nixara's great head lowered until her enormous eyes were level with Katie's face. "You risked much to bring us this warning," the Emperor said thoughtfully, "and you have revealed something important. You understand our language and our politics far better than any servant should. Tell me truthfully, Katie Morrison, what are you really?" Katie took a deep breath. "I'm exactly what I appear to be. A human servant who cleans floors and empties trash containers. But I'm also someone who pays attention and learns quickly. I had to understand your world to help you heal, so I studied everything I could find." The Emperor studied her for a long moment. Through his bond with Nixara, Katie could see him sharing thoughts and impressions with the dragon. Finally, he nodded slowly. "The nobles who oppose us are led by Lord Commander Corveth," the Emperor said. "He has been waiting for an opportunity to challenge my rule for decades. My grief made me weak in some ways, but it also made me unpredictable and dangerous. Now that I am healing, he sees his chance to act." "What will you do?" Katie asked. A new voice answered her from the chamber entrance. "We will face them with strength and wisdom, as a true leader should." Katie spun around to see a tall figure in royal robes entering the chamber. But this was not the broken, weeping man she had first encountered. Emperor Vexithan stood straighter now, his eyes clear and alert. The healing process had not just eased his grief. It had restored his confidence and authority. The healing you have given us, Katie, has reminded me of who I used to be before tragedy broke my spirit, the Emperor said. I had forgotten that a ruler's first duty is to his people, not to his own pain. The next morning brought the confrontation Katie had feared. Lord Commander Corveth arrived at the palace with a group of high-ranking nobles, demanding an audience with the Emperor. Katie watched from the servants' gallery as they filed into the great throne room, their faces grim and determined. Emperor Vexthan, Lord Commander Corveth began, his voice echoing through the vast chamber. We come before you with grave concerns. Your recent behavior has been unusual. Your mercy toward rebels, your questions about citizen welfare, your association with a human servant, these things suggest that your judgment has been compromised. The Emperor sat on his crystal throne with Nixara coiled behind him, her massive form radiating power and intelligence. Both of them looked completely different from the broken beings Katie had first encountered. The dragon's scales gleamed like black stars, and her eyes held ancient wisdom instead of endless tears. My judgment has indeed changed, the Emperor replied calmly. For 50 years I ruled from a place of pain and anger. I made decisions based on grief rather than wisdom. Tell me, Lord Commander, which of my recent choices do you find objectionable? Corveth stepped forward boldly. You spared the rebels on Kepler Station instead of executing them. You ordered investigations into working conditions in the outer colonies. You have been asking questions about things that never concerned you before. And most disturbing of all, you have allowed a human servant to influence your mind. I see, the Emperor said thoughtfully. And you believe these actions make me unfit to rule? We believe you have been weakened by alien influence, another noble declared. The human has used some kind of mental manipulation to change your nature. You are no longer the strong leader our empire needs. Katie felt her heart sink as she listened to the accusations. She had tried to help, but now her efforts were being used against the Emperor she had grown to care about. But Emperor Vexthan surprised everyone with his response. He stood up from his throne, his presence filling the chamber with authority that had been missing for decades. You speak of strength and weakness, the Emperor said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. Let me tell you what I have learned about true strength. For 50 years I was trapped by guilt and grief. I ruled through fear because I was afraid. I made cruel decisions because cruelty felt like control. That was not strength. That was the weakness of a broken mind. Nixara raised her great head, and when she spoke, her mental voice reached every mind in the chamber. My Emperor speaks truth. Our shared pain poisoned not just our bond, but our ability to lead wisely. The healing we have found has not made us weak. It has made us whole. The dragon's psychic presence was overwhelming. Katie could feel the power radiating from Nixara's mind, a force that could have destroyed armies. But instead of using that power to threaten, the dragon was using it to share understanding and truth. For 5 decades, Nixara continued, my nightly weeping disturbed the psychic networks of this palace. My grief created a cloud of depression that affected every decision made within these walls. The Emperor's cruelty was amplified by my pain, just as my guilt was amplified by his anger. We were trapped in a cycle that harmed not just ourselves but our entire empire. Lord Commander Corveth looked shaken by the dragon's revelation. But the human servant, how can you trust the advice of such a primitive being? Emperor Vexithan smiled, and Katie was amazed to see genuine warmth in that expression. Katie Morrison taught me something that all our advanced technology and ancient wisdom could not. She taught me that healing requires courage, not just time. She showed me that love can be transformed from a source of pain into a source of strength. The Emperor gestured toward the servants' gallery where Katie was hiding. Come down here, Katie. These nobles should meet the person they find so threatening. Katie walked down to the throne room floor, her legs shaking with nervousness. She felt tiny surrounded by all these powerful aliens, but she held her head high. This human servant, the Emperor announced, possesses something that we Zephyrians had forgotten: the ability to heal emotional wounds through compassion and understanding. She taught me that Princess Lyraneth would want me to honor her memory through wisdom and kindness, not through endless suffering. From this day forward, the Emperor continued, Katie Morrison will serve as the first human advisor to the Imperial Court. She will help establish programs throughout the Empire to better understand and utilize the emotional intelligence that humans possess. We have conquered many worlds, but we have failed to learn from the people we conquered. That changes now. The nobles looked stunned by this announcement. Several started to protest, but the Emperor raised his hand for silence. Any who oppose this decision are free to challenge my authority through the traditional methods, the Emperor said calmly. But know that you will face not just me, but Nixara as well. And we are no longer broken by grief. We are healed, whole, and stronger than we have been in 50 years. None of the nobles dared to issue a formal challenge. The psychic power radiating from Nixara made it clear that the dragon was no longer the weeping, guilt-ridden creature she had been. She was once again the mighty being who had helped conquer galaxies, but now her strength was guided by wisdom instead of pain. In the months that followed, the Zephyrian Empire began to change. Katie worked with teams of humans and aliens to develop new approaches to leadership and conflict resolution. The Emperor's decisions became more thoughtful and just. Most importantly, the nightly weeping that had echoed through the palace for 50 years was replaced by something new. Now, when Katie walked through the corridors at night, she heard a different sound coming from the dragon's chamber. Nixara was singing deep, beautiful songs that spoke of love and loss and healing. The dragon's voice carried hope through the crystal walls of the palace, touching every heart within reach. On clear nights, Katie would climb to the observation deck where she had first witnessed the dragon's sorrow. Now she watched Nixara soar through the purple sky, her wings spread wide as she celebrated the joy of being alive. Emperor Vexthan often joined Katie there, no longer the broken ruler she had first encountered, but a wise leader who had learned that true strength came from healing old wounds rather than hiding them. "Thank you," the Emperor said one night as they watched his dragon dance among the stars. "You gave us back our lives." Katie smiled, thinking of Princess Lyraneth and the love that had finally been transformed from a source of pain into a source of light. Sometimes,